Coming up on this episode, a look back at the Warriors' embarrassing, disastrous 52-point blowout loss to the Boston Celtics at TD Garden yesterday, as well as a look forward to the Warriors' schedule for this week and over the remainder of the season, and the schedule of others around him in the Western Conference as the race for the playoffs heats up. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Let's jump straight into it because I don't really want to talk about yesterday's game, but we have to. A 52-point loss to the Boston Celtics, down 44 at halftime, a 61-17 run over the last 18 minutes of the first half. How do you describe it? It was embarrassing. However, I think for casual fans, for non-Warrior fans, you look at the score at halftime, you look at the final score overall, 140-88, and that's clearly mind-boggling to you. However, there needs to be some context here, which is what I'm happy to provide people listening to this, because I do think as much as the 61-17 run is inexcusable, I do think that at the end of the day, the Warriors were clearly not locked in, and I think the way that's emphasized is through Draymond Green and his defense on Jaylen Brown in the first quarter, where he just decided to sag off him as if he was Tony Allen, Andre Roberson. How the Warriors sometimes guard big men like DeMontis Sabonis and whatever, just letting him have whatever he wants from three-point range, which was really odd given Jaylen Brown is actually a pretty good shooter. 36% on his career, under 30 for about 34.8%, I think, this season. But he takes a lot of tough ones. He takes nearly 7 a game. So he's like a good three-point shooter. And that was a really odd decision. And the fact that Draymond said afterwards that they didn't come up with that plan or didn't decide they were going to do that until 15 minutes before they went out from the locker room, that just tells me they were not locked into this game, whatever, and that they were like, we don't really care, so we're just going to try this weird, risky tactic and see what happens. And like, that's just not something you do, I think, if you're keyed into the game and you really, really want to win and you're 110% concentrating kind of thing. So disappointing from that aspect, but I get it, right? Like, this was the third game in 4 days, after the back-to-back in New York and Toronto, where Steve Kerr described it as the worst NBA travel he's ever had, with the Warriors leaving New York, or having their plane delayed in New York, and then not getting into Toronto until about 7 a.m. I think Steve said the players went to sleep at 8 a.m. on, was it Friday morning, I think, and then they played Friday night. And that was the big one for me, where like they could have also been excused for losing that game in Toronto, but they didn't find an excuse. They went out after a slow start, and Steve had to get quite animated, took 2 timeouts in the first 5 or 6 minutes there. But they got things rolling in the second half, outscored the Raptors 59-41 in the second half to beat them there 120-105. And that was the big one for me, because once you get that victory, you're 3-0 to start the road trip. This was a loss that you could afford to have. It wasn't a must-win game by any means, and the Warriors played like that. They played like a team who knew they could afford to chill a little bit and not give it 110%. And yeah, like, nationally televised game, it hurts. The biggest thing that hurt was the fact that Steph even played. Like, he was questionable with the knee bursitis or whatever else. He just shouldn't have played. And in some ways, it was actually better that Golden State got blown out in the first half, and it allowed Steph, Draymond, and Clay to rest the entire second half, rather than, be a competitive game and, potentially losing by 4, 5, 6 points at the end, where at the end Steph's played 35 minutes and Draymond's played 30 and Clay's played high 20s. So I think it's actually almost a good thing that they were blown out in the way they were. But yeah, third game in 4 days after that rough travel to Toronto, I mean, it is what it is. And I think you can afford to lose that game. It was also their 7th game in 10 days after the All-Star break, which was included 2 back-to-backs as well. So it's been really tough for the Warriors. And Steve said after the game, in reference to the game, he said, flush it down the toilet. And it doesn't really matter going forward. Like, they're still 13-4 over their last 17 games. They've still got momentum, and that shouldn't be washed away simply because they had one embarrassing outlier performance where they just clearly didn't rock up. I mean, the start was okay. That, they had the game tied at 21, but from that point, the 61-17 run, I mean, you don't see stuff like that happen too often. I cannot remember kind of a 1.5 quarter, 18-minute period that was so lopsided. I mean, the Celtics were making everything and were getting whatever they wanted offensively, and the Warriors offensively, well, that was as tough a watch as you were likely to see. So do you take anything forward moving from it? I always, like, whenever you have these kind of losses to Eastern Conference teams, I could not care less. I absolutely could not care less, because I look at it and think, well, if you're going to meet this team in the playoffs, it won't be to the NBA Finals, and it's going to be a completely different stage than what you played yesterday. So I don't really care, because if you do get to the NBA Finals, and if the Warriors were to get to the NBA Finals and face Boston, that would be a great result from this position. That would just be a fantastic result. So yes, you'd want to win, and I think being the NBA Finals, the Warriors would clearly be a lot more motivated than what they were yesterday. And as I said, it's a different stage as well, where experience really starts to come into it, where coaching probably comes into it a little bit more as well. So that's two things the Warriors have got on their side over Boston. In saying that, I don't think the Warriors are going to make the finals. I hope they do, but I don't think they will. And again, I just don't. Any loss, like if they go out and beat Milwaukee by 40 or lose to Milwaukee by 40 on Wednesday, then that doesn't really make any difference to how I feel about that particular matchup. Now, if they lost by 40, that would be super disappointing, and the way we feel about them right now would change, given they've just had this loss against the Celtics. But so long as they kind of respond from this, then I don't really care. And I think they've shown throughout even their dynasty years, they're capable of just taking nights off and just being like, can't be bothered kind of thing, and being capable of these blowout defeats. So I would say as well, like, they've been pretty competitive in most games. I'm trying to think back to games earlier in the season. They had those back-to-back games at home, which was the real dire lowest part of the season, where they lost. They got blown out by the Pelicans, and then they lost by 15 to the Raptors. That was the real dire part of the season, where that was probably the only time where I've questioned the competitiveness of the group. And of course, that was in January, just before the trade deadline. And I remember thinking and saying on this podcast that was a time where I thought the conjecture and speculation about what the Warriors might do at the trade deadline probably was starting to get to the team, and players weren't necessarily playing as hard as what they might do because their futures are up in the air. So yeah, that's about the only other point in the season where I can question the competitive levels of this team and the motivation to go out there and play. And yes, it wasn't there yesterday, but again, given the schedule, I think that was more than fair enough. Is there anything else to take from the game? I mean, Boston are brilliant. I mean, they are the best team in the league right now. I think given what they've done in the playoffs, where many people had them favourites against the Warriors 2 years ago, and then they had a 2-1 lead and lost 4-2. Given they lost to a Heat team, yes, they came back from a 3-0 deficit to force a Game 7, but to lose that series, I think they'd be super disappointed in. So, I mean, they've got plenty of experience now in getting to the kind of the pointy end of the postseason. But I still have some question marks. Like, obviously, Porzingis' health is a huge concern. But the moves they were able to make over the offseason to get Porzingis, to get Drew Holiday, defensively, they are just on another level. And I think that was the biggest thing that stuck out to me, particularly in that first half, particularly during that 61-17 run, was usually like one of Steph or JK are out there at all times, or whatever it is. And usually those two guys being, the two best isolation scorers on the team, they can usually find a mismatch and try and hunt that. The Celtics are probably the only team in the league that, when they've got either their starting five or like Horford's their sixth, whenever they've got their full array of players on the floor, there's no one you can really hunt. Like, who are you hunt? Like, JK's trying to post up Drew Holiday yesterday, and that's not a mismatch. That is not a mismatch, unfortunately. Like, Derek White's an elite defender, Brown and Tatum, and then Horford and Porzingis as well. Like, that top six defensively. I said back when they made the moves for Porzingis and Holiday that if they don't win the championship this year, Joe Mazzulla's got to be out, because this might be the best top six that I can remember. It's got to be one of the best top sixes in NBA history, just talent-wise, two-way ability. Like, the Warriors, you go back to the KD with Steph, Clay, KD, Draymond, Iggy, I guess, and who's your sixth there? Like, is it? The centers were never overly, like, are you adding Zaza into the mix? Is it Sean Livingston? Whatever. Like, I suppose there's an argument to be made there, especially with the five that the Warriors had there, the Hamptons five, I suppose. So there's that. But aside from that, in kind of 21st century, or at least in the last 10, 15 years, it's hard to come across a better top six where you've got a couple of legitimate all-stars, a guy in Porzingis who's been an all-star previously, Holiday's been an all-star previously and the third best player in a championship team. Horford's, yes, out of his prime, but he's been an all-star previously, and there were genuine claims for Derek White to be an all-star this season. Like, that top six is unbelievable. So they are fantastic, and to watch what they do defensively is actually, as tough as it was for the Warriors, it was actually kind of cool to see what they were able to do defensively in a league that is so offensive orientated, obviously, right now. So full credit to the Celtics. They were unbelievable, and it's going to take something seriously special to, beat them this season. And I think, everyone's kind of saying it now, the Celtics-Nuggets finals is probably where we're looking at the moment, but there's still plenty to play out. And yes, that might be the favorite for the finals right now. But that doesn't mean that the teams outside of Boston and Denver should give up hope of potentially doing something come the postseason. Were there any positives for the Warriors yesterday? Not really. I watched the full game still. I kind of tuned out to it. I started writing started writing my article in the second half so I could kind of get it up straight as the final buzzer went. There was not really too much to take away from the second half. Lester Quinones, top scorer for the Warriors with 17 points. A little bit inefficient, though. Had 5 rebounds. I think him and Moses Moody and Jerome Robinson were the only 3 to score in double figures. Moody was probably the biggest positive just from early in the game. Like, if you just look back at the first 6 minutes where the Warriors had it tied at 21, Moody had 7 points, I think, in that period. He's just playing really well at the moment, and he is earning himself a genuine rotation spot whenever Andrew Wiggins comes back. There is no doubt to me that he is going to be in the rotation. He's going to be ahead of Dario Saric, who was benched in the second half against the Raptors on Friday, much to the pleasure. Sorry, that's a bit rough. I'm not taking pleasure out of Dario Saric getting benched, but it's a call that I've been asking for Steve to make for quite a while, where you give Trace those minutes at the 5, and when Wiggs returns, Moody kind of gets the wing forward spot that Dario, I suppose, has been playing more as a 4 now with TJD at the 5. And TJD was the first guy off the bench to replace Draymond in the third quarter against the Raptors, and he was the first guy off the bench to replace Draymond in the first quarter yesterday. So hopefully, I think that is a move that we're likely to see more moving forward, where TJD plays the majority of the backup minutes. Perhaps there's still some Looney there, depending on how deep Steve wants to go. Maybe like Looney's your 11th guy. Do you want to go to him for a few minutes each half? Maybe. And then Saric is out of it completely. But Moody's a guy that's clearly showing that he should be a 15, 20-minute per game player. I thought he played, again, reasonably well yesterday, as good as he could be in such a heavy defeat. But I think his play early was positive. He had 17 points, against the Raptors on Friday, Thursday against the Knicks. That fourth quarter defense on Brunson and overall was fantastic. So Moses is probably the biggest positive from the road trip, and it's fantastic he's been able to take his opportunity with Wiggs out. Other than that, I just want to push this. It's not an agenda at all. It's just something I'm noticing. TJD had a couple of nice post moves to start the second half against Horford, where he finished over him in the post. I just want the Warriors to be mindful that I think he's got more ability as a post-up player than people might realize. And if you go back to his college career, like last season, there are a lot of times the ball is running through him in the post. And I'm not saying that he's got Al Horford on him or he's got a legitimate center on him that he should be given the ball and said go make a play kind of thing. He's clearly not at that stage, but there's just some times where he's got a genuine mismatch where he's got a guard on him in the post and the Warriors don't go to him at all. And I think he's skilled enough and has enough touch around the basket to be able to give him the ball in a genuine mismatch and let him go to work. So that's just something I'd like to see, I suppose, moving forward. And I think those couple of buckets over Horford to start the second half, again, re-emphasize that point that he's someone that can finish at the basket and can be used particularly in mismatches against guards and guys that are much smaller than him. So I thought he had 8 points, 8 rebounds, couple of blocks. I just really hope moving forward that he gets the majority of the backup center minutes and hopefully he should be playing 15 minutes a game. Moody should be playing 15 minutes a game. So I think we've seen this season that the more that Steve has lent into his young players, the better he and the Warriors have been for it. That started with Pods and JK, and hopefully we'll extend out to Moody and TJD as well. All right, we'll move on. The standings. Now, if you want a positive out of yesterday, it's the fact that the Mavs lost at home to the 76ers, which is a bit of an upset. So that's a good result for the Warriors. And then I watched the Suns-Thunder game yesterday. The Thunder went up big early in the first half. I think we're up big at halftime. Suns came thundering back, pardon the pun, went in front and led with kind of 5-6 minutes to go. And then the Thunder closed out the game really well, which again was a positive result for the Warriors. So the Mavs and the Suns both losing meant that the Warriors didn't really lose anything from their defeat, I suppose, yesterday in terms of the overall standings. They are now 2.5 games back from the Kings and Suns in 6th and 7th. However, they do not play those teams again. So they are clearly relying on those teams to be to help them out, I suppose, a little bit with some losses down the stretch here. They're 1.5 games back from the Mavs in 8th. The big thing about that is they've got 3 games against the Mavs to come. So they really, destiny is still in their own hands there because they could beat the Mavericks 3 times and then in the remaining games just ensure they have the same or better schedule or better record than them. And surpass them in the standings. So those 3 games are going to be obviously really, really crucial to where the Warriors end up. If we go to Tankathon, the remaining strength of schedule for the Warriors and some of these other teams over the remainder of the season. So the Suns here are 7th. Now, I find it difficult to see the Warriors surpassing 3 teams and getting to 6. I just don't like the Kings. I struggle to see how they're going to surpass them. I think ideally their best hope would be 7th and then to host the first playing game and hopefully win that. So the Suns are in a little bit of jeopardy right now because Booker missed yesterday's game with an ankle injury. I think they don't believe it's overly serious, but if he misses a few games, I mean, there's only 22 games to go. Like a few games is going to be pretty pivotal here. So if he misses a few, the Suns also have the 5th. Sorry, no, they don't. They have the toughest schedule remaining in the league. So toughest schedule, Booker out. Suns in a little bit of trouble, maybe. And I think that's if you're the Warriors, you might just smell a little bit of blood in the water net there. And obviously you've got to get past the Mavs first. But again, as I said before, kind of destiny's in your own hands with the Mavs because you can still beat those guys 3 times and surpass them there. So Phoenix, a little bit of trouble and potentially a chance there for the Warriors if they can surpass the Mavs and the Suns, get to 7th, and then obviously host a playing game by the end of it. The Lakers are pretty much still identical with the Warriors at the moment in terms of the win-loss. I mean, the Warriors are 32-28 and the Lakers are 33-29. So the Lakers have played the 2 extra games. They have got the 5th hardest schedule remaining. And crucially, again, those 2 teams, the Warriors and Lakers, play twice more over the remainder of the regular season. So again, those 2 big matchups will be huge. And really, the Lakers having the 5th hardest schedule should mean that the Warriors, fingers crossed again, they should be able to get ahead of the Lakers in terms of the standings. Sorry, by the end of the season. So I'd be surprised. I'd be very disappointed if the Warriors drop back to 10th by the end of the season. But again, those 2 matchups against the Lakers, I think it's 1 each at Crypto and at Chase. They're going to be big for the final standings. The Kings have the 13th hardest. So again, like average schedule remaining, I suppose, for them. I'd find it unless the Warriors were like their last 22 games, unless they're to go like 17-5 or 18-4, like I just struggle to see how they would surpass both the Suns and the Kings. Again, I think the Suns are more realistic right now. The Kings, 13th hardest schedule, fairly average. I'd be surprised if the Warriors can surpass them, but 2.5 games, it's possible. It's certainly not out the realms of possibility, and obviously that would be ideal to finish in the 6th seed, depending on where you're who you're going to play in that first round. Because you look at the top 3 in the West right now with the Thunder, the Timberwolves, and the Nuggets. You'd actually prefer, so long as you can kind of guarantee yourself a playoff spot, which you can't obviously unless you finish in the top 6. But if you made the play-in, then I think if you finish 7 or 8 and it turns out that OKC, Minnesota finished top 2 and Denver finished 3rd, specifically for the Warriors and probably for all the other teams around the mix as well, you'd prefer to play the Thunder or Minnesota over Denver. And so it's going to be interesting to see if there's like any kind of manipulation going on here, because we spoke about it last season as well, where the Kings were that team who had a really good season, but that everyone thought, the teams around the play-in, like that 6, 7, 8 spot, like you want to try and get the Kings. And so the Warriors, obviously being able to get 6 and not having to go through the play-in tournament was really crucial. But the fact that meant that they matched up with the Kings, they were clearly going to be a team that were beatable, and the Warriors ended up doing that in 7 games. So it will be interesting and this won't happen until the last 2 or 3 games of the season, but whether there's some manipulation to try and avoid Denver. Like if you're 6th, would you purposely lose a game to fall back to 7th? Now, I don't think you necessarily would, because then you're at risk of the play-in tournament. You'd be in the play-in tournament, and that presents risks for you. But if it means not getting Denver and Jokic, who is just unbelievable, and instead getting Minnesota, who have been excellent, but have been, are young, have had some playoff issues in the past, I suppose, with Cat and Gobert. If it means getting the Thunder, who again have been absolutely superb, but have very little playoff experience, I don't think you do, because that means you'd have to go through the play-in tournament. But it's just something to figure out. The Mavs have the 24th hardest schedule, and then the Warriors have the 25th hardest schedule. So good schedules for those 2 teams remaining. And again, the 3 matchups will be really crucial moving forward. This week for the Warriors, let's have a quick outlook to this week. So the 4-game road trip finished 3-1. Good result there. Again, as I said before, the loss to the Celtics is going to be okay so long as they respond in a positive fashion here over these 3 games this week. All at home at Chase Center. The Bucks on Wednesday, then the Bulls on Thursday, back-to-back there, which presents as being difficult, but then you've also got you've had 2 days rest before. Of course, Steph, Draymond, Clay rested the entire second half against the Celtics, barely played. So you you do find it, I suppose, difficult to be able to manage those back-to-backs in some situations, but I think this one for the Warriors should be okay, particularly given they're both at home. And then the Spurs later on the weekend as well. I think that's on Saturday. Brandon Pajemski will be back for the Warriors, according to Steve Kerr after yesterday's game. Missed 2 games with, I think he's had a knee issue or something as well. So that'll be big for the Warriors. If you look at these 3 games, Milwaukee are obviously going to be challenging anytime you come up against Giannis. Dame's been underwhelming, I suppose you'd say, this season, and particularly recently. However, a homecoming of sorts for him. He always likes to play well against the Warriors and Steph. So that's going to be a big challenge. Chicago are a team that always make me nervous because they are, like, when you've got a guy like DeRozan, I know Levine's out at the moment, but you've got a guy like DeRozan, he's capable. And I think they are capable. They're not a horrifically bad team. They're still trying to make the play-in tournament themselves. So that's nervous. That's like a nervous game where you'd expect to win, but Chicago are capable. And then the Spurs, I'm not going to say it's an absolute cinch that the Warriors win that. I'm not penciling that in as a W. And yes, they will be heavy favourites. And yes, they should absolutely win that game. Just been like, I watched Wemby again yesterday against the Pacers after the Warriors game finished, and nothing surprised me with that guy. And he can legitimately do anything, and it wouldn't surprise me. And so does Wemby come out? Whenever the Warriors come up against the Spurs, I'll just always go back to what happened in the preseason, where I just remember watching Wemby play against the Warriors in the preseason and think, what are we watching? What are we watching right now? And what he's been doing in the last 9 or 10 games is just absolutely ridiculous. Ridiculous for any player, let alone a rookie who's, 19, 20 years old. It's absolutely unbelievable. If you look at his last 9 games, and I'll probably get into this again in a podcast later in the week because we've got a while until, 5 or 6 days until this game. But if you look at the last 9 games for Wemby, so he's had 7 with at least 20 points, 7 with at least 10 rebounds, 6 with at least 5 assists, 6 with at least 5 blocks, including a 10-block game in that as well, 4 with at least 3 threes, and just to cap it off, two of those games he's had 5+ steals. The guy's just an absolute menace on both ends of the floor. It's so entertaining to watch. It's unbelievable. So full credit to him and what he's been able to do in his rookie season. And as a result, I don't think the Spurs are necessarily 100% lock for the Warriors to beat, just because watching Wemby, as I said, he can do anything and nothing would surprise me. So 3 games the Warriors could potentially lose, obviously, but also I think you'd be very disappointed if the Warriors didn't go 3-0. And I think if they're serious about being a playoff team, if they're serious about getting the 7 seed or at least the 8 seed, at least jumping up 1, I think they have to win all these 3 games. Particularly, I think there's another road trip coming after that. So I think it's vitally important that you go 3-0. Milwaukee are obviously going to be the big one, and I think the Warriors' recent record against the Bucks isn't overly great. So looking forward to these games, absolutely, but a little bit nervous, I suppose, for like the Bulls and the Spurs are the teams that made me nervous, and obviously Milwaukee is just flat out good enough to beat the Warriors, should that eventuate. So just a little conversation there, a little discussion about the standings overall, where the Warriors sitting over the remaining 22 games of their season, the schedules for them and the other teams. And obviously a look ahead to this week. But thank you guys for listening. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. And I'll probably be back for another podcast either after the Milwaukee game or after the back-to-back. Just depending on what happens in the Bucks game. We'll wait and see. But other than that, guys, thanks for listening and have a great week ahead.